Thank you, first of all, for having me here in Kazakhstan, and it's really wonderful to be here with all of you. If I understood correctly, what you were saying, I'm an image maker. I'm a content producer, right? So my main activities are in telling brand stories through images and through films, through videos and campaigns. And I also teach at IE in Madrid. IE is a wonderful university. We've got one of the top business schools in the world. And what's nice about IE is that most of the people who are teachers at IE are also practitioners. So my main job is as a content producer, and then I teach as well. And I've been doing some of these master classes for the last couple of years. And Victoria, my boss, one of my bosses at IE, she said to me, "So what do you want to do your next master class on?" And I said, "Well, can we get the slides up?" So Victoria said to me, "What do you want to do your next master class on?" And I said, "Why don't we do it on what makes brands go viral?" And she said, "That sounds fantastic." And then I went home and I suddenly realized, I said, "Oh no, oh my God, I have no idea what actually makes brands go viral. I mean, who knows, right?" And so I set out on this year-long journey, exploring this question of what makes brands go viral, because we've created viral campaigns. We've created campaigns that have had videos that have had millions of views, shares, photographs that have been seen hundreds of thousands of times, right? But if you really had to sit down and say, well, what exactly is it that makes something go viral? How does it happen? And that all of a sudden becomes a much more difficult question. If you have to actually identify what are the components of a viral campaign, and how does the internet work, and how does kind of sharing happen in today's age? So I set out on this journey to learn, and one of the first things. Does this want to work? Let's see. Can we pass the slides? This doesn't seem to want to. Oh, it's not on. You see, there's a that's very important. There we go. Okay, so what I did. Okay, sorry, thank you. So what I did was I began this year-long process of kind of research and learning to answer this question, right? And so I started to read, and I read everything I could find on this subject. And I read, and I read, and I read, and I read, and I read until I couldn't read anymore, right? And then I started to go out, and by the way, these 3 books are fascinating. If you're interested in this subject, these are 3 wonderful books. But then I started to go out and talk to people, right? And so I started to talk to professors at IE. I started to talk to creative directors in New York City and asking them this question. I spoke to my students, and I just asked everybody, well, what do you think it is? What is it that actually makes things go viral, right? And basically what I discovered is that I had always thought it was the content, right? I thought that there was something magical about viral content, and that if you could just get the ingredients right of the viral content, of the content itself, that then the content would go viral, right? But then I thought to myself, well, but there's something that happens here, which is that you could have 100 different pieces of content which are very, very similar or even the same, and yet only one of them will go viral. And so why is that, right? And so that kind of challenged me. And then so what I discovered in this process is essentially that there are two parts to this. One part of this is, as we know, the content itself, that there's something exciting, interesting, surprising about viral content, right? But the second aspect of this is how does sharing happen? What is the nature of sharing, and how does the internet work? And why is it that things can be popular, right? In other words, something might have 10 million likes. If Beyonce, let's say Beyonce takes a photograph of herself, right? And Beyonce has 22 million followers. So Beyonce posts a photo of herself, and her photo gets 3 million likes. I think she just posted or was it Rihanna? Just posted a photo of herself pregnant, and this photo gets 3 million likes. So is that viral? Because it's not necessarily being shared, but it's very popular, right? So these are sort of the questions that I was struggling with along the way. And so this is what I was, really struggling with. How does virality happen? Now, when I ask this question to my students will initially, they'll say the following things. They'll say, well, things go viral when they get shared. Okay, all right, so things get shared, right? And then another thing they'll say is, well, things are viral when there's many, many, many people who like them, right? So you might have, we kind of think if something has millions, right? Millions is kind of the key word here, right? If something has millions of likes, then it's viral, okay? And then they'll say, well, in terms of the content, the answer might be, well, something that's different, right? Something that's new, or maybe something that's funny. So maybe it could be something that challenges the way that we normally do things, right? So these are kind of the answers that we would come up with. And so what are the questions? So I want to start. I want you to do something. We're going to start with an activity. I want you to take out your phone, okay? So everybody take out your cell phone. If you have Facebook on your cell phone, do you all use Facebook? Lots of Facebook users? Okay. Take out everybody. Perfect. All right. So, and if you don't have Facebook, I give you permission to look at the Facebook of the person next to you. Okay? So take out Facebook, and what I want you to do is I want you to look. You guys have to play too. Okay? Yeah. Get your phone. All right. Okay. So take out your phone, and what I want you to do is I want you to look at the last thing you shared. All right? Now, I'm not talking about, a selfie that you took, while you were at the beach here in Astana. There's a beach, right? Okay. So I'm not necessarily talking about, a selfie you took. What I mean is something that you saw somewhere, okay, some piece of content that you then shared on your own page, okay? Now, I want you to ask the following questions. And these are really important questions. First of all, where did it come from? Or who did it come from? Right? So did that piece of content come from a friend of yours? Right? Or did it come from some blogger? Or did it come from some professional page? Or was it a thing that you saw on YouTube? Where did that content come from? Right? And why did you trust the source? The second question is, why did you trust the source of that material enough to share it? Right? In other words, if it was from a friend, you probably trusted that source of material because it came from your friend. Right? So why did you trust the source? Second question. And the third question, which I think is the most fascinating, is, why did you share it? What does it say about you? Because each of us has a brand image that we are portraying to the world, right? So maybe you shared something about new media trends, right? So you are really into new media trends, and so your brand is that I'm a new media trendsetter, right? And maybe you shared something about what makes people happy, right? And so that's your brand, and that means that you're smiling, you're laughing all the time, right? So you like to make the world happy, and that's the brand that you're putting out into the world. And so what we see is that the choices that we make in terms of what we share on a personal level reflect who we are, and they reflect who we want to be to the world, right? Now, the third question, which is a very important question, and we'll see why this is so important a little bit later, is did you share this within your own circle of friends, or did you share it to some other page or some other group? Do all of you belong to some other group or some page? Let's say that, a group of media professionals of Kazakhstan, for example. Right? So you belong to this group of people. Now, those are not necessarily close friends of yours, right? But maybe you shared this information to that other network. So you have your own network over here, and then you shared into this other network, right? Well, that's another possibility, right? And so this last question of, what does it say about you? What does it say about your brand? I think that's a fascinating thing for you even to explore later, which is what is my brand? What is it that I'm trying to kind of present to the world, right? So the questions that I asked myself during this journey were the following. First of all, I wanted to know how much of virality is controllable. Is it possible for a company, for example, could megatrends actually create content that would go viral? Could that be an objective that they would set out to do, right? First question. Is it predictable, right? Now, what's interesting here is that I kind of think of virality and social sharing as something similar to predicting earthquakes, right? Now, we know earthquakes happen. We know that there will be earthquakes, right? But if I said to you, where and when is the next earthquake going to happen, you would say, well, I have no idea, right? Is there going to be one? Yes, of course. There will be earthquakes, right? But can we predict exactly where and when and how it's going to happen? No. Extremely difficult, right? And so what happens is that when we look at viral events and how they occur, we can look at them backwards. In other words, once it happens, we can say, oh, I know why that happened. It happened because it was very popular and because this famous person shared it, and then it got shared by millions of other people. And have you all seen this thing, the Ice Bucket Challenge? Have you seen that? Right? And so we look at something like the Ice Bucket Challenge, right? This viral event, and we say, oh, well, yeah, of course, because it was really popular and it was fun and it was funny and it got shared by some famous person who did the same thing, and right. So we look at it backwards in time, and we can see how it happened. But the question is, can we actually plan this kind of event? So is it a process that can be designed, or does it just emerge? Does it just come out of, the crowd and what people kind of like? So the next question, and this for me was really the biggest discovery in this process, is how do networks function? How do networks function, and what is the role of social structures within this world of viral content, right? And we're going to look at that, okay? So, and this is the question. The next question is the question that all of my clients want to know the answer to, which is, how can brands create content which will go viral? Because my clients come to me and they're desperate. They're desperate. They want their brand to get out there, and they don't know how to do it, how to get it to go really far. They're desperate to know what this secret is, right? And so the question is, can you actually create branded content which will go viral, right? So that sort of secret ingredient, in other words, what is the secret to making products that people like? Is there some secret ingredients that we are attracted to, right? Whether it's music, movies, television, books, games, apps, across the whole landscape of culture, right? What are those things that we're attracted to, right? And can we kind of identify some key ingredients, right? And then the last question is, and this is the question I mentioned before, why is it that some products or events, why is it that some fail, right, while similar ideas catch on, right? And so what is happening? What is the dynamic there? So these are all the questions that I launched into as I began this process of discovery. Now, it's important to remember, we think of this thing of sharing as something that's new, right? We think that it's something related to, internet and social platforms. Well, the fact of the matter is that human beings have been sharing since the beginning of time, right? Way back in, when Homo sapiens were populating the earth 200,000 years ago, we would sit around a fireplace and we would tell stories. And we told each other myths and stories, and these stories helped us to live better lives. They helped us to understand how to live better together, and they helped us understand nature, right, and survive, right? So sharing is not new. We've always shared, right? And then what happened was, in about 3,000 years BC, we had the invention of hieroglyphs by the Egyptians, right? So then we had the written language and cuneiform in Sumeria. So written language became part of sharing, right? And then in about 1440, we had the invention of the printing press, right? And so all of a sudden the printing press allowed us to share. And then if we move forward to about 1820, we had the invention of Morse code, right? So all of a sudden we could share using this new technology. And then about 20 years after that, we made the first phone call, right? And then what happened was time became very compressed. And so all of a sudden we had the movies. So we would go to the movies and we would share together on these big screens, right? And then that turned into, radio, which was in our homes. So it came kind of closer to us. And then we had the television, right? And then we had computers. And now all of a sudden, we're carrying this sharing in our pockets, right? So it's coming closer and closer to us, and it's actually getting compressed in time. Each of those last things, radio, TV, internet, computers, cell phones, each of those things only took less than 10 years to catch on. So we went from 200,000 years to things happening, like this, right? And who knows what the next step is. If it's getting closer and closer and smaller, we'll probably have a chip in our eyes, or we'll wear some contact lens that will have, a screen or some sort of digital information. It's going to get closer and closer and closer until it's actually part of us, right? We all know this terrifying, scary future that's coming for us, right? So we've been sharing forever, okay? Now I want to share with you a story about a piece of music. And the reason that this piece of music is so interesting is because this is a really good way for us to look at how sharing happens, right? And this is before the invention of the internet, right? But what we'll see when we look at this piece of music and how it became popular is that it is actually the same kind of structure that exists today, okay? So this piece of music is called Rock Around the Clock. Does anybody here know? I saw you shaking your head. Rock Around the Clock? You want me to sing it for you? Do you know? 1, 2, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, rock. You know this song? 5, 6, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, rock, right? We all know this song, right? So the question is, where did Rock Around the Clock come from? Here, we'll check it out. This is Bill Haley in the Comets in like 1957 singing Rock Around the Clock. Ready, go. 1, 2, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, rock.
12 o'clock, rock, we're
Turn it
gonna
up.
rock
Around.
the clock tonight. Put your glad rags on.
Okay.
Join me home. We'll have some fun when the clock.
Great, beautiful, thank you. Okay, so we all know this song. You all know this song. Everybody's heard of this song, right? And so if I asked you, well, what do you know about this song? You might say, oh, well, that song is like one of the first rock and roll songs. Yeah, of course, it was a huge hit, it's still popular, and people sing it at weddings, and people sing it in karaoke, and right. And so Rock Around the Clock is like, of course, it's huge. So when we look at Rock Around the Clock, we kind of talk about it like it's an earthquake after it's happened, right? In other words, we know when we look at it, and in looking at it backwards, we say, oh, well, Rock Around the Clock is super popular. Why? Because it's great content. It's great music. It makes you move, right? And so we kind of think that it's very easy to understand why it happened, right? But now listen to the story of Rock Around the Clock. So here's what happened with Rock Around the Clock. Bill Haley and the Comets, they're going to record a record. Some of you young people might know what records, are these things that you would put onto a machine and they would go round and round and round and you would play music from them. Okay. So they were going to go into the studio and they were going to record this single, which had an A side and a B side. Okay. So Rock Around the Clock, Bill Haley says, I want to record Rock Around the Clock. And the record label says, no, we don't want you to record Rock Around the Clock. We want you to record this other song that we like better. Right, and it was called Three Women and I don't know, something. Anyway, you've never even heard of the other song, right? So what happens is they go into the studio and they tell Bill Haley, you have 8 hours. In those days, they gave them 1 day to record. So they said, you can go in, you've got to record this song for us, and if there's any time left over, you can go and record Rock Around the Clock. So they go into the studio and they spend about 7.5 hours and they record the first song. And then they've got half an hour left, and they say, okay, Bill, now you can go in and you can record Rock Around the Clock. So they do one take. They do one take of the song, right? And the vocals are terrible. And they say, we don't have time to record the whole band again, but Bill, you can go back in and you can record just the vocal part. So Bill goes back in, records the vocal part, and they all go home. Now, what happens to the single? The single sells about 10, 15,000 copies, and nobody really pays much attention to it, and it disappears into history. Okay? Now, a couple of years later, there's this movie producer in Hollywood, and this movie producer has a son who's really into rock and roll music, and his son collects rock and roll music, right? So what happens is that one night, another producer who's making a film called Blackboard Jungle, right, comes over to the house of the kid and the dad producer, right? He comes over for dinner. And they're sitting around at the dinner table, and the producer says to the father, he says, I'm doing this film Blackboard Jungle, and I'm really looking for a good piece of music to do, to open this movie, Blackboard Jungle. And Blackboard Jungle is a movie about young, kind of radical kids in the 50s, okay? Kind of like you all right there in the middle, right? All that bunch of radical kids right there. Okay, so he says, I'm looking for music to open this. And the father says, my son knows all about rock and roll music. You should ask him. And so after dinner, they go into the library, right? And the kid starts to put on music. And he puts on one song after another, and the producer's listening. And then all of a sudden, the kid puts on Rock Around the Clock. A 1, 2, 3, right? And the guy stops and he says, oh my God, that's it. That's the song, right? And so he takes the song and he puts the song opening the movie Blackboard Jungle, right? And what happens? Blackboard Jungle becomes a massive hit. Right? It becomes a super hit, and everybody hears the song, and everybody starts to call into the radio stations, and they start requesting to hear Rock Around the Clock. And so the radio stations, they start to play Rock Around the Clock, and then people start to hear it even more, and people start to buy it, and all of a sudden, Rock Around the Clock becomes a massive hit and sells. It's one of the largest selling songs in history. Okay, so this is the story. Now, what is the lesson from this? Now, think about this for a second. If I could draw a picture, imagine I could draw you a picture of how this happened. And we make networks, okay? So what happens? Well, first of all, the album is created, right? And it sells to about 10,000 people. So here we've got this one network of people who've got this piece of music, right? And then what happens is over here, you've got another network, which is the movie producers network, right, over here. And what happens? The kid takes the song and he moves it from this network over here and he shares it. he shares it, but he doesn't share it within his own network. He shares it to another network. And this network then shares it, right? And it gets shared to all the cinemas, right? To all the theaters, which are their own little networks. Like this is a network right here, right? You all are an interest network. You all have come together. You're not all close friends, right? I'm assuming. But you all are an interest network, and you've come here together for one common purpose. And so we can think of, so we've got the movies over here. So that's this network that gets shared. And then the radio stations start to play it, which is another network, right? So it jumps over here to this network, right? And then from there, people buy it, and they start playing it in their homes. And so this is what happens to Rock Around the Clock. And so what you see through this example is that the process of sharing, if we actually look at how networks are structured and how information moves and jumps from network to network, we can begin to understand how things become viral, right? And what's fascinating is that nothing has changed. Really?
Bill Haley.
No, we don't want to hear Bill Haley again. We already heard him, all right? So now what's interesting about this is, we say content is king. This is what we always say. Content is king. Well, content might be king, but distribution is the kingdom. So in order for us to understand how these systems work, we have to understand content, but we also have to understand the distribution system, right? And so there's this idea. Have you all heard of this idea, gatekeepers? Anybody, some of you? So what is a gatekeeper? Well, a gatekeeper is a person that when information or some event, when something comes to them, they either suppress it, in other words, they either stop it or they share it, right? This is what a gatekeeper is. They're either letting it through or they're stopping it. They either open the gate or close the gate, right? Now, if you think about it, every single one of you is a gatekeeper because every single one of you sees information and makes the choice either to stop it or to share it. So when you're sitting there and you're going through Facebook, right, and you see something and you go, nah, no, I'm not going to share that. You go to another, no, this is interesting. And then you share, right? So you are opening the gate to that information, right? And it's the same thing, for example, if you go to a new restaurant, right? You go to a restaurant you've never tried before, you really like the restaurant, and what do when you really like a restaurant? You talk about it, right? You tell your friends about it. So you begin to share that information within your network. And so what's happened is that restaurant has now, again, jumped. And I want you to really think about this idea of jumping, because that's really important. It's jumped into your network, right? So gatekeepers, if we look at kind of the technical definition of what a gatekeeper is, gatekeepers are people, collectives, companies, or governments that as a result of their location in a network can either promote or suppress the movement of information from one part of a network to another, right? So in our example of Rock Around the Clock, who are the gatekeepers? Well, we know the kid is a gatekeeper, right? And we know that the movie producer is a gatekeeper, right? And then the radio stations, these are all gatekeepers. You are all gatekeepers, right? Now, so if we look at this, we can say that you either let information go through or you stop information. But the important thing is that when you let information go through, what you're doing is you are somehow bridging these networks, right? Now, there are many different kinds of gatekeepers. There are, browsers. When you go into Google, for example, into a search engine, right? And you know that when you search, the more you search in Google, the more that Google knows who you are, right? We all know this, right? So the Google begins. Have you ever done this where you go and you search for a new pair of shoes, right? And then you go into Facebook, and all of a sudden there's an ad for that exact new pair of shoes that's all of a sudden coming on your Facebook, and you go, well, wait a minute, what's going on? Like,